Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. Now, a couple weeks back, Thrustmaster generously sent over a couple of racing wheels, and after getting the wheel and pedals all set up, I decided to boot up some older racing games available on the PlayStation 4. So for today's video, we're going to take a look at Evolution Studios' Driveclub and see how it compares visually to Polyphony Digital's Gran Turismo Sport. For this comparison, both games are being played on the PlayStation 4 Pro, using a T300 RS Racing Wheel, and are being recorded using a 4K capture card to achieve the highest quality footage. Alright, so let's kick this comparison off by taking a look at a couple of matching car models, starting with the Ferrari 458. So the first thing you've probably noticed right away is the massive difference between the output resolution. Driveclub, being a much older title on the platform, can only output at 1080p, with some significant anti-aliasing to help avoid any jagged edges on car surfaces. GTSport, on the other hand, outputs at 1440p, with additional upscaling to achieve a 4K image. Thanks to this massive pixel advantage, GTSport's finer details really pop on the screen, and are assisted further by some incredible HDR implementation that, for the sake of this particular video, was disabled as it won't display properly when uploaded to YouTube. But what's really interesting here is that despite its lower resolution, Driveclub still manages to outdo GTSport when it comes to extremely small details along the body of the car. Take the engine block for example. At a distance, they look about the same, but upon closer inspection, you can clearly see some major aliasing and less complex geometry in GTSport. Driveclub, on the other hand, looks incredible here, and even sports some extra cables and high-quality textures to boot. This becomes even more apparent when looking at the Ferrari insignia on the hood, that is very clearly detailed in Driveclub, but appears like a blurry mess in GTSport. The taillight provides the perfect summary of these findings, as the image on the right is more crisp and sharp, but the textures on the left are slightly more complex. The BMW M4 offers similar findings, with the brakes along this wheel appearing more detailed than the same brakes in Gran Turismo. So, while GT Sport's cars are still gorgeously detailed and are brought to life with that higher resolution output, Driveclub still has it beat when it comes to overall model complexity. Next, let's talk environments, starting with the general style and variety offered in both titles. GT Sport is a fairly straightforward racing game. Tracks offered are mostly small circuits, with several different track variations to make the best use of the detailed environments. And there's an obvious goal to provide a very realistic and authentic simcade racing experience. This means that all the tracks are built close to scale to real-world locations, including iconic tracks like Brands Hatch. Driveclub, on the other hand, is a much more arcade-like game. While the tracks still have a realistic feel, they aren't based strongly on real-world courses. Additionally, most of the tracks are one-way sprints, rather than lap circuits. Determining which of these is superior really boils down to personal preference, but as far as race variety goes, Driveclub has GT Sport beaten this field. Driveclub allows players to race in some unique locations, including some lush canyons in Canada, a desert in Chile, the icy hills of Norway, and some muddy tracks in India. These tracks are beautifully detailed, with lots of striking color and decoration that makes GT Sport's tracks look dull by comparison. But what GT Sport lacks in aesthetic, it makes up for in functionality. The tracks in GT Sport are wider and built with genuine racing in mind, requiring players to more carefully outmaneuver opponents while avoiding running clean off the road. Driveclub's tracks are a lot more forgiving, with much less intense turns and invisible walls that function as bumpers on the side of the road. When taking an even closer look at the quality of these environments, there's really no clear winner. The asphalt roads and trees in GT Sport clearly are more complex and detailed than in Driveclub. But on the other hand, the dirt and grass textures in Driveclub are superior to those featured in GT Sport. In fact, most of Driveclub's vegetation holds up remarkably well today. Sure, there's groups of flat cardboard trees hidden off to the sides, but the distant hills are loaded with seemingly three-dimensional trees that help give the game an incredible depth that GT Sport doesn't quite match. There are some nice extended jaw distances in GT Sport as well, but the tracks as a whole come off as bland and uninteresting when compared to the more flashy appearance of the tracks in Driveclub. Next, we have lighting. Just like with the cars and environments, the lighting quality kind of leans both ways here. On the one hand, Driveclub's reflective surfaces, especially with wet road surfaces and metallic paint jobs, are leaps and bounds better than the reflections used in GT Sport. But Gran Turismo's fantastic use of HDR lighting effects gives it this incredible realistic tone that Driveclub's simulated lighting really can't match. That being said, GTSport still feels noticeably more artificial, and this is due in part to the baked lighting and weather effects. When selecting a race in GTSport, players can select between a handful of weather and time of day scenarios. Driveclub, on the other hand, offers something a bit more advanced, with dynamic time of day and even an option to adjust the rate at which the time of day changes during a race. This adds a great deal to the feel of the racing, as the sun can set as you're driving through a tunnel and force you to adapt on the fly using headlights in a pitch black environment. This, coupled with the more effective bloom and volumetric lighting effects, gives Driveclub a distinct advantage that not even GTSport's much brighter Ferrari reds can compete with. Shadows follow a similar back and forth trend. General shadows cast by the player and other AI cars look much more diffused and natural in GTSport, and stand out nicely thanks to the beautiful texture work on the asphalt here. But it's important to note again that the lighting in Driveclub is dynamic, and so the shadows will actually adjust based on the time of day reflected in game. The shadows will even smoothly fade away when the sun is blocked by occasional cloud cover, and features along the body of the car seem to cast shadows more reliably, as opposed to GTSport, whose shadows seem inconsistent with the level of light in the scene. And then of course we have our effects. Here we have a much more cut and dry win for Driveclub across the board. Driveclub offers superior damage effects for vehicles, better smoke effects, and it still offers some of the very best rain effects in a racing video game. Rain droplets not only land on the windshield, but will slide across the glass depending on the direction that the player's car is traveling. It's an amazing effect that, coupled with the light water spray blurring out the screen during heavy downpours and the fantastic reflective surfaces all throughout, give Driveclub a distinct advantage here. Rain effects weren't even a part of GTSport when it released, but have since been added in, and are only available in a select few tracks and only in a light capacity. Vehicle damage can still happen in GTSport, but it's mostly just little bumps and scratches, as opposed to the slight body deformation that happens in Driveclub. Finally, let's wrap up with a quick sound comparison. Which game do you think has the superior audio design? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Driveclub holds up surprisingly well for a racing game that released almost 6 years ago. Sure, its online services have recently been shut down for good, so you're stuck racing offline against bots now. But the car models are still some of the most detailed in the entire gaming industry, and effects like rain hitting the windshield or reflections along the hood of the car are still impressive. Gran Turismo Sport, on the other hand, a much more recent game, still offers its own advantages, including a far higher output resolution, higher frame rate, more realistic track designs, and some fantastic HDR lighting implementation. As far as racing around in both of these games using a racing wheel, everything feels great. It'll take some time getting used to after using a gamepad for so many years, but I can't imagine going back at this point, as the force feedback rotors and more precise control help take these already incredibly immersive racing experiences to a different level. If you're looking at picking up a peripheral racing wheel and want to try this set out, you can find a link to the T300 set I'm using here listed in the description below. But what do you guys think? Does Driveclub still hold up, or do you feel that GTSport holds the crown in terms of racing graphical fidelity on the PlayStation platform? Let me know in the comments section. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.